Do you believe two people can disappear without a trace and still leave behind the most powerful story of love? 10 years ago, a young couple vanished deep in the unforgiving wilds of Arizona's Superstition Mountains. No clues, no goodbyes, only silence. But what was found a decade later, inside an abandoned silver mine, shocked the entire nation. Their final moments weren't filled with fear, but with something far more haunting and beautiful. This isn't just a mystery. It's a story of devotion, of light in the darkest place, and the legacy two souls left behind for the world to find. Stay with us, because what happened beneath that mountain will change how you see love, loss, and life itself. The sun had just begun to rise over the low-lying hills of Santa Fe, casting a golden shimmer across the stucco walls of a small adobe apartment complex tucked away on the city's quiet south side. Olivia Bennett stirred beneath the linen sheets, the early light slipping through the slats of the blinds and dancing across her cheek. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee lingered, still warm in the pot Ethan had brewed before she woke. She stretched lazily, then sat up. The apartment was small, but theirs. A tangle of art prints, books, plants, and mismatched furniture, all speaking of two people who had chosen simplicity over ambition, intimacy over indulgence. Olivia had been working the night shift at the urgent care center 3 blocks away. Her days off were sacred. Normally she'd spend them sleeping in. But this morning would be different. From the worn love seat by the window, Ethan Morales was already wide awake, knees pulled up, camera resting on his lap, eyes fixed on his phone. The morning sun caught in his messy dark curls, the gold earring in his left ear catching a glint. He looked up the moment he sensed Olivia behind him. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, his voice low and charged with the familiar thrill of possibility. He turned the phone around and showed her the image. It was a satellite photo, taken just days earlier. A carpet of wildflowers blooming across the Sonoran Desert, painting the dry earth with improbable shades of violet, orange, and gold. A rare desert superbloom, the kind that only happened once every decade, if that. Olivia rubbed her eyes. "Is that near the Superstition Mountains?" Ethan's smile deepened. "South Slope. A friend of mine from the ranger station said it's peaking right now, but only for a few more days." She didn't need to ask the next question. She already knew the look in his eyes. That restless, reckless look that meant he'd already packed his camera lenses in his mind and mapped out every turn of the drive. Olivia let out a breath, then leaned against the arm of the couch. "Let me guess, you want to go today?" He shrugged. "I mean, it's only a 6-hour drive. We could take a few days, camp under the stars. No schedules, no phones, no electricity, no beds, no noise." That last part silenced her for a second. She thought of the fluorescent buzz of the hospital, the constant dings and alarms, the sharp smells and heavy conversations. For a moment, the idea of being nowhere, just with him, surrounded by sky and wind and light, sounded like the first breath after being underwater too long. She looked at him, then laughed softly. "Okay, but you're in charge of spiders and scorpions." 3 hours later, they were on the road. The old Ford Escape sputtered a bit on the incline out of Santa Fe, but settled into a steady rhythm on the open highway. Olivia leaned her head out of the window, hair whipping in the wind. Ethan had the music up, some old folk album he liked, and his hand rested on her knee. The GPS glowed faintly on the dashboard, pointing toward the southeast edge of Arizona, to a place neither of them had ever seen, but both were already dreaming of. They stopped in Tucson to fuel up, grab extra bottled water, and load a foam cooler with fruit and snacks. Olivia, always the practical one, double-checked the first aid kit and added sunscreen and electrolyte tablets. Ethan, ever the artist, spent 10 minutes debating which prime lens to bring before stuffing both in his bag. She rolled her eyes, but just kissed his cheek anyway. As the desert opened up before them, the Superstition Range began to emerge like a shadowed wave on the horizon. Jagged, mysterious, and steeped in myth. It was a land where stories of lost gold, phantom trails, and disappearances weren't just folklore, they were whispered warnings. But Ethan wasn't the kind to be deterred by ghost stories, and Olivia, as always, followed the light in his eyes more than the logic in her mind. By late afternoon, they reached the park entrance. A ranger named Curtis, tanned and wind-beaten, handed them a map. "Lot of folks coming out this way for the bloom," he said, pointing at a shaded valley on the paper. "But stick to the marked paths. This terrain's trickier than it looks." Ethan thanked him, but already his attention had drifted. On the back of the map, he noticed a faint marking, an unpaved trail leading toward an older mining area, rarely visited. They drove further in and found a flat, flower-ringed clearing about 100 yards off the main route. Ethan set up camp, unfolding their tent with practiced ease while Olivia laid out their sleeping bags. As the sun began to set, casting long lavender shadows across the wildflower fields, they ate from a shared bowl of grapes and cheese, and watched the sky turn a kind of orange only the desert could create. That night, lying side by side beneath a dome of stars brighter than any city sky could afford, Ethan held her hand in the silence. "You ever think," he said softly, "that maybe this, right here, is the real world, and everything else is just noise?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to him, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Don't ever let this go." Ethan smiled, kissed her forehead, and, unbeknownst to her, slipped his hand into the pocket of his jacket, brushing the edge of a velvet box. He didn't open it. Not yet. But he knew. Tomorrow was the day, and neither of them would ever see the sky again. Dot. The morning sun had just begun to spill over the rim of the Superstition Mountains when Olivia unzipped the tent and stepped barefoot into the cold sand. The desert was quiet, eerily so, as if holding its breath. Ethan emerged moments later, camera already slung around his neck, eyes still heavy with sleep but alive with purpose. "We'll catch the light," he murmured, pointing toward the east where the first blush of dawn was melting the shadows. Olivia smiled, brushing her hair back into a loose knot. They packed light, 2 canteens of water, a bag of trail mix, Ethan's camera gear, and a small emergency radio. "Maybe we should leave a note in the car," Olivia said as she adjusted the straps on her backpack. Ethan hesitated. "We won't be long," he replied. "It's barely a 2-hour hike round trip." She didn't argue. She rarely did with him when he spoke like that, with certainty, like he could bend nature itself to his vision. They followed a narrow animal trail veering east, away from the marked path, through fields of desert marigold and lupine, golden petals brushing their legs like soft warnings. The farther they walked, the quieter the world became, until the only sound left was the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the occasional rustle of wind against dry brush. After nearly an hour, they reached the base of a jagged rock formation Ethan had spotted on the map the day before. It loomed like a forgotten fortress, its face weathered by time, its shadows deep and unwelcoming. As they circled its base, Olivia noticed something. An opening in the rock, partly hidden by fallen brush and time-worn debris. A wooden beam framed the entrance, splintered and cracked, with faded red paint that once spelled a warning: danger, unstable shaft. "Is this—" she began, but Ethan was already walking toward it, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. "It's an old silver mine," he said, voice echoing slightly in the gloom. "Look at the structure, mid-19th century, maybe older." Olivia stood at the threshold, unsure. Something about the air felt wrong, thin, expectant. "Ethan," she said quietly, "let's not. Please." But he was already inside, stepping cautiously over fallen beams, his camera raised, snapping shots of dust-filled shafts and rusted tools. "Just 5 minutes," he called over his shoulder. "It's too good not to shoot." Olivia sighed and stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, swallowing the warmth of the morning sun. They moved carefully, turning corners where the old wood groaned under invisible pressure. The tunnel curved slightly, then opened into a larger chamber where old carts and debris sat in ghostly stillness. Ethan lifted his camera. Flash. Flash. Olivia stood behind him, arms crossed. "This place feels like it's holding something back." He smiled at her, lowered the camera. "That's what makes it beautiful." That was the last recorded moment. When the sun crested high over the campsite, no one noticed the absence. That evening, when the moon replaced the desert heat with a brittle chill, their SUV sat untouched beneath the stars. Inside the tent, their extra food, clothes, sunscreen, and a half-written postcard to Olivia's sister remained perfectly undisturbed. No footprints, no broken branches, no phone calls, no messages. On Sunday night, when Olivia and Ethan failed to return to Santa Fe, their absence was met with silence. On Monday morning, when Olivia didn't clock in at the urgent care center and Ethan didn't respond to his freelance editor, the silence grew heavier. By Tuesday, that silence had become panic. Their families began to call, then to drive, then to demand answers. But by then, the desert had already hidden its secret. A search party was dispatched within 48 hours. Helicopters swept over valleys and ridges. Bloodhounds followed old trails until the scent vanished in the heat. Flyers were posted on gas pumps and ranger stations. Reporters came and went. But nothing moved in the mountains. The campsite remained untouched. The trail they had followed was unmarked. The mine wasn't even on most official maps. As days stretched into weeks, then months, the two lovers seemed to have dissolved into the land itself, swallowed by time, heat, and silence. And in a desert where things rarely bloom more than once, no one knew that love had taken root underground, waiting patiently to be found. Some places whisper warnings, others remain silent, letting the foolish walk into their jaws without protest. The mine Ethan and Olivia entered that morning was of the latter kind, quiet, ancient, and indifferent to the living. Long after their laughter faded into its tunnels, the wind blew gently across the desert floor, smoothing their footprints, lifting grains of sand into eddies that erased even the memory of their passage. No one knew they had stepped through that splintered threshold. No one knew the mountain had closed its lips around them. Inside, the light from Ethan's phone flickered with each step, casting long shadows that danced on the crumbling walls. "Stay close," he whispered. Olivia obeyed, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his jacket. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something older, something that had watched men walk in and never return for more than 100 years. About 15 feet in, the tunnel narrowed. Old wooden beams creaked above their heads, their nails rusted, their strength more memory than substance. Olivia paused, her hand resting on one support beam. "Ethan, I really think—" But he was already ahead, calling back softly, "Just a bit further. Look at that light coming through the cracks in the ceiling. Perfect for contrast." He turned to snap a shot of her. The flash lit her face, uncertain and beautiful, framed by the ribs of the earth. She tried to smile for him, but her body knew what her mind refused to admit. This place did not want them. The tunnel curved left, then descended. They followed. The air grew cooler, damper. Olivia began to shiver slightly, though she said nothing. The glow of Ethan's phone illuminated old pickaxes leaning against the wall, cobwebs strung between rusted wheels and collapsed carts. This place had been left in haste, long ago. No names etched into the stone, no workers' tools packed away, no tracks leading out. Then, without warning, it happened. There was a deep groan, followed by a sharp pop from somewhere behind them. Olivia spun around. Ethan raised his light. A plank had shifted in the ceiling. A spray of dust fell, and then silence. "Probably just settling," Ethan muttered, voice tight. But he turned, starting back the way they came. "Let's head out. I got the shots." They reached the bend in the tunnel, or what had been a bend. Now it was a wall. Rock. Thick, immovable rock. Where the tunnel had stood, the passage was sealed with stone and debris, collapsed like a closed eye. Olivia froze. No, this was the way. This was the way out." Ethan pushed at the rubble. It didn't budge. He set the camera down and started clearing the debris with his hands. First pebbles, then heavier stones. Dust filled the air. He coughed. Olivia dropped beside him, clawing at the rocks with frantic fingers. It didn't help. "We're not buried," he said, trying to keep calm. "There's still air coming in." Olivia wiped her forehead. "The roof must have collapsed. We can't move that alone. We need to find another way out." They turned and headed deeper. There was no choice. The mine stretched further than either of them had imagined. The tunnels branched unpredictably. Some curved into tight loops. Others simply stopped. They passed through chambers where the smell of rot had long since faded, where bones of animals, or people, lay forgotten. Ethan checked his watch. They'd been inside for nearly 2 hours. No signal, no GPS. Only the dwindling light from their phones and the tight grip of Olivia's hand in his. At one point, they found what might have been a side shaft. A narrow path, barely wide enough to pass through. Ethan turned to Olivia. "You okay?" She nodded, her throat too dry to speak. They crawled. Dust clung to their skin. Rocks scraped their knees and palms. Olivia bled from a cut on her forearm. Ethan's shoulders bruised from squeezing between walls too tight. When they emerged, it was into a space slightly larger than the others. A flat stone against one wall looked like it had been used as a resting bench. The chamber smelled faintly metallic, dry, untouched. "This is where we wait," Ethan said quietly. Olivia didn't argue. They had no idea where they were, no idea how to get back to the collapse, no idea if anyone even knew they were missing. They sat in the quiet. Olivia reached for Ethan's hand. "Do you think they'll find us?" He hesitated. "They'll try." "You didn't leave a note." "No." "Why not?" "Because I didn't think—" He trailed off. He looked at her, truly looked, her eyes glassy and wide, her face streaked with dust and worry. He swallowed hard. "I was so focused on what I wanted to capture. I didn't think we'd get lost." Olivia rested her head against his shoulder. "I don't care about the photos," she said. "I just want to go home." In his jacket pocket, the velvet box pressed against his ribs. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he turned his phone off to conserve the battery and leaned his head against hers. The mind said nothing, but it had closed its mouth. And now, it would not let go. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. Olivia's sister, Megan, called her 3 times on Sunday night, each time letting it ring until voicemail picked up with Olivia's usual soft lilt. "Hey, it's Liv. I'm probably at work or off the grid with Ethan. Leave a message. I'll get back to you." Megan left one message, then another, and by the 3rd time she was no longer trying to be casual. Ethan's editor also sent an email asking for an update on a photo set he'd promised by Monday morning. Silence. The hospital called on Monday to ask if Olivia was coming in for her 7 a.m. shift. Silence. By noon, both families had already felt the familiar shiver in their stomachs. That internal tremble people only admit after the fact, the moment their mind whispers something their heart refuses to hear. Megan drove straight to Olivia's apartment. Nothing out of place, keys gone, backpack missing, but it was the unopened bottle of insulin test strips sitting on the counter, one Olivia had meant to drop off for their mom, that made her sit down and whisper aloud, "She never forgets." Meanwhile, David Bennett, Olivia's father and a retired Marine, was already dialing Ethan's number, then the ranger station at Superstition Mountains, then the Arizona State Police. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He simply asked one thing. "Has anyone seen my daughter and her boyfriend?" The answer was no. By Tuesday morning, a search was officially opened. The ranger who had checked them in on Friday afternoon, Curtis Hale, remembered them immediately. Sweet couple, seemed prepared. He asked a lot about off-grid areas. I told him not to stray from marked trails. A helicopter was dispatched by noon. The Ford Escape was spotted within hours, parked in the gravel lot where they had been advised to camp. The tent was still pitched, cooler still full. Olivia's journal rested inside, the cover slightly curled from the sun. Inside were notes for future night shifts, a grocery list, a quick sketch of the desert bloom. But no note, no directions. No indication of where they went. A ranger gently unzipped one of the backpacks. Inside, unopened granola bars, sunscreen, extra socks. Olivia had packed methodically. A second ranger held up Ethan's tripod, left resting by the sleeping bags. His most expensive lens had not been taken with them. A pair of mugs still sat by the fire pit, one with lipstick on the rim, the other with a ring of dried coffee. They weren't planning to go far, one ranger murmured. They thought they'd be back. That same evening, the first wave of search crews arrived. Dog teams, volunteers, law enforcement, park experts. Flyers were printed with Olivia and Ethan's faces, last seen Friday, estimated route unknown, gear possibly minimal. Drones began scanning wide arcs around the campsite. Megan held her mother while she cried. Rosa Morales, Ethan's mother, lit a candle at her tiny apartment in East Los Angeles and knelt silently before it, her whisper prayers drifting toward the ceiling fan. News stations picked up the story by Wednesday. Young couple missing in Arizona wilderness. The headline read, accompanied by photos of Ethan holding his camera near Bryce Canyon and Olivia hugging a patient at a community health fair. Beneath the headlines, readers left hundreds of comments, some hopeful, some cruel, most questioning how 2 people with experience could vanish without a trace. But David knew better. He had seen men disappear in the field before. He knew how nature devoured the unprepared, the overconfident, even the unlucky. He packed a military-grade rucksack that night and drove through the night from Santa Fe, arriving at the camp by dawn. The sight of Olivia's journal on her pillow made his heart falter. But he didn't cry. He only unrolled his map, marked the coordinates, and began to plan. "I need every ranger who's worked this range in the past 20 years, he told the site commander. Every known shaft, every mine, every unmarked trail. Rosa arrived that same day. She didn't speak to anyone at first. She just stood at the edge of the cordoned-off site, arms wrapped around her middle, eyes locked on the far horizon. When a ranger tried to usher her gently back, she looked him in the eye and said, "That's my son, don't move me." By the weekend, the site had become a tent city. Heat advisories were issued daily. Dust storms rolled in each afternoon, stalling drone flights. Dogs collapsed from exhaustion. Still, David combed every map. Rosa cooked for volunteers. Megan contacted reporters and posted daily updates online. No tracks were found, no gear, no scent. It was as though the earth had swallowed Olivia and Ethan whole and left behind only their shadows. "They were never supposed to be gone this long," Megan whispered in one interview, her voice cracking. "They're not the kind of people who disappear. They're the kind who call, the kind who care." As each day passed, hope took on strange shapes. A shimmer in the distance, a piece of cloth snagged on a branch, a lone footprint that led nowhere. The rangers began whispering at night about the terrain, about the old legends of Superstition Mountain, about how miners used to go in and never come out. One, a Navajo search volunteer named Eli Yazzie, simply said, "This mountain doesn't take, it waits, and when it closes its hand, it doesn't always open again." On the 9th day, a new lead arrived. Someone found a camera battery in the dirt near a rock formation, 3 kilometers from the site. It wasn't enough. It wasn't them. It was just another ghost. But still, they searched, and the desert kept its silence, and the mouth of the earth stayed shut. Dot. The wind was louder in the 5th week. It didn't howl exactly. It breathed long and low through the canyons and over the sun-cracked stones, rustling brittle brush and forgotten bones. The kind of wind that made tents ripple and radios crackle, and men stop walking just to listen, unsure if they'd heard a voice or just imagined one. David Bennett stood on the ridge above the old creek bed, binoculars steady in his calloused hands, eyes scanning the jagged outline of Superstition Mountain. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, his boots caked in red dust, and his shoulders carried the weight of every second that had passed since his daughter vanished. 53 searchers remained. They were no longer rotating in shifts. They were rotating through despair. At night, over bitter instant coffee and heat-blistered maps, they whispered the words no one dared say aloud. Lost, buried, gone. David refused them. Every morning before the sun crested the Saddleback Cliffs, he rose. He briefed. He pointed. He walked. "Somewhere out there," he told the team, "Olivia and Ethan are waiting." But the truth was, each day that passed without a footprint, a sound, a broken twig, was like adding another lock to a door that would never open. Rosa Morales stayed behind at base camp now. The desert heat had become too harsh, and her breathing too tight. Each day she lit the same white candle inside a glass jar, set it beside the faded photo of Ethan in his graduation robe, and whispered a single prayer, "Light his way." By week 6, the authorities began to shift their tone. "Resource depletion," they said. "We've covered over 1,200 square miles. No new leads. It may be time to reconsider." David slammed his fist on the hood of a Ranger vehicle. "You reconsider when my daughter walks out of that canyon, not before." That same afternoon, a reporter from a local station approached him with a microphone. "Mr. Bennett, what would you say to those who believe Olivia and Ethan might never be found?" David looked into the lens, jaw clenched. "Then they don't know my daughter. She doesn't quit. Neither do I." The segment went viral overnight. Support poured in from around the country. Former Marines showed up to volunteer. Strangers sent supplies. A church group from Flagstaff brought hand-painted signs with messages like, "Hold on, live," and "Don't give up, Ethan." But the desert remained indifferent. Search drones flew over the same coordinates again and again. Still nothing. Until one morning, on the 72nd day, Eli Yazzie found something. He was a quiet man, known for moving alone through the wilderness with a kind of reverent grace. That morning, before sunrise, he had veered off the main search pattern, following the direction of a hawk that kept circling. He didn't call it instinct. He called it listening. The bird led him toward the northeast edge of the range, near a cliff where the land broke suddenly into a drop of jagged boulders and iron-colored sand. That's where he saw it, just beyond the edge of a collapsed ravine, a piece of fabric, sun-bleached but unmistakably synthetic. It was caught on the corner of a sharp rock, fluttering just slightly in the breeze. Eli knelt beside it. Carefully, he reached into the brush. A scrap of blue nylon, reinforced seams, backpack material. He didn't say a word. He simply took a photo, marked the GPS, and radioed in. The camp erupted. David and Megan drove out within minutes. Rosa gripped the candle tighter and didn't speak for an hour. The search refocused. New units were dispatched. The ravine was treacherous, the terrain unstable, but rangers rappelled down, scanned, marked. 2 days later, 500 feet west of the nylon scrap, they found something else. A cracked camera lens. Nikon. The same make Ethan had used. Its glass was chipped but intact, half buried in the dirt like an eye still trying to see. The air around the site was still. Too still. No wildlife, no sound. Just heat and dust and the sharp scent of iron. "We're close," David whispered, staring into the cliff's shadow. "I can feel it." But as quickly as the signs appeared, they stopped. For another month, the mountain gave no more answers, and slowly, searchers began to drift away. The media quieted. Donations slowed. What had once been a national focus faded into just another mystery in a desert full of them. On the 100th day, Rosa packed away Ethan's graduation photo and replaced it with a candle burned low. That night, as stars swept over the black silhouette of the mountain, David stood alone at the original campsite. The tent was gone now, the gear removed, but he remembered the exact spot where Olivia's shoes had rested, side by side. He stared into the dark and said nothing. There were no tears, just breath, just wind, just echoes where voices should have been. The desert doesn't weep, it doesn't rage, it endures. It watches silently as grief takes root in the hearts of those left behind, growing not like wildflowers, but like thorns, quiet, deep, and unshakable. Rosa Morales sat on her small porch in East Los Angeles, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug, the same one Ethan gave her 5 birthdays ago, painted clumsily with a sunflower and the words, "Para Mama." She hadn't drunk from it in weeks, only held it like she used to hold his baby shoes, his childhood drawings, the letters he wrote her from photography school in Utah, each one ending with, "I'll call soon, promise." But now the phone never rang, and her apartment had grown unnaturally still. The television stayed muted, the stove cold, the windows closed even on the hottest days. Ethan's room was untouched, his books still stacked by the bed, the lens cap still hanging from the knob of his closet door. She kept lighting candles, not because she believed they'd bring him home, but because not lighting them felt like betrayal. Across the state line, David Bennett hadn't returned home since April. His house in Santa Fe sat dark, mail piling at the door. Megan came by sometimes to water the plants or do laundry, but she couldn't stay long. Being there felt like sitting in a ghost's pocket. David had taken up residence in his Jeep Wrangler. He kept folders in the passenger seat, maps, satellite images, old ranger reports, annotated search logs from 2009 to 2019. He read them like scripture. Each night he parked near a ridge or a dry wash, reclined the seat, stared up at the stars, and whispered his daughter's name like a prayer. Olivia. He could still see her face in the desert wind, her silhouette against the canvas tent, the sound of her voice calling his name as a child from the edge of the lake. He could still feel the moment she disappeared from this world. Not in a single event, but slowly, inch by inch, with every unanswered question, every dead lead, every hollow promise from men in uniform who had long since moved on. But he hadn't. He couldn't. Because there are people who break under the weight of loss, and there are people who become the weight, the force that holds memory like gravity. David was the latter. He started his own search website, where oliviaandethan.org. He uploaded timelines, drone footage, thermal maps. Volunteers joined from across the country. Retired hikers, amateur detectives, conspiracy theorists, they all came with hope in their hands and headlamps on their foreheads, and David welcomed them without judgment. He didn't care why they came, only that they kept looking, and look they did. The area around the Superstition Mountains was combed again, this time with better technology, heat sensors, portable ground-penetrating radar, even borrowed equipment from a local university. Some claimed they saw shadows on ridges, glints of metal, flickers of movement, but nothing solid, nothing conclusive, just stories, just wishes. Meanwhile, Olivia's name trended once more on social media. A journalist from Desert Depths, a true crime podcast, dedicated a 3-part episode to the case. The vanish in the vortex, they called it. Downloads soared. Public interest flared again briefly. A small group of Reddit users formed a task force, digging into property records, old mining claims, theories about hidden government installations, and geological anomalies. It was absurd, but also human. People wanted a reason. Any reason. Because if two young, smart, prepared people could simply vanish, what did that say about the rest of us? And still, no answers. Not until the 9th year. March 2018. A group of outdoor filmmakers from Phoenix were scouting abandoned locations for a YouTube documentary series titled The Hollow Earth Project. Two of them, Jason Miller and Jaden Brooks, mid-20s, thrill seekers with more ambition than caution, entered an off-trail area not listed on any official ranger maps. They ignored the posted warnings. Danger, unstable ground. They were drawn instead to the ruins of an old silver mine nestled behind a sharp incline and a collapsed washout. It was the kind of place they lived for. Raw, eerie, untouched. Jason carried the camera. Jaden held the light. They stepped into the mine just after noon, their voices echoing in the silence. Laughter. Excitement. Unaware. In their footage, later reviewed frame by frame, there is a moment just before they descend a narrow path where Jason says, "Man, imagine if someone actually died down here." He says it like a joke, like a dare. 4 minutes later, the laughter stops. The light flickers. The air shifts. The camera catches something ahead. A glint of metal, something out of place, unnatural in a place so long abandoned. Jaden whispers, "Dude, are those people?" The recording shakes. Jason says nothing for 6 seconds. Then, "No freaking way." They walk forward slowly. The final seconds of the clip are dark, disjointed. The image bounces wildly. Jason drops the camera. His breathing goes ragged. Jaden screams once, then silence. When they reemerge 30 minutes later, they are pale, drenched in sweat, eyes wide and unblinking. They drive 30 miles before they find a ranger outpost. The footage is turned over. Authorities are contacted. The media embargo is immediate. But news travels fast, faster than policy, faster than law. David receives a call at 3:17 p.m. from a number he hasn't seen in a decade. It is Detective Angela Grant, retired, but still listed as a contact for unsolved wilderness disappearances. Her voice is calm, measured, but he hears it. The crack, the tremble. "David," she says, "we need you to come to Arizona." The convoy moved at dawn. 3 black SUVs, 2 Ranger trucks, and a medical examiner's van wound their way across the gravel service road, like a slow procession of ghosts returning to the place where they died. Jason and Jaden rode in the back of the lead SUV, silent, pale, eyes locked ahead, but seeing something far beyond the cracked windshield. Neither of them had spoken much since they were pulled from the mine 2 days earlier, but what they had said, and more importantly, what they had filmed, had been enough to bring the desert to life again. Detective Angela Grant stood at the ridge above the mine entrance, arms folded, jaw clenched tight, as she scanned the gaping hole in the cliffside like a wound that had reopened after 10 long years. She was in plain clothes now, no badge, no gun, but her presence carried weight. She had closed hundreds of cases in her career, but this one had haunted her. Olivia Bennett and Ethan Morales weren't just names in a file. They were the ones who had disappeared cleanly. No fight, no screams, no trace. Just a tent, a parked SUV, and a silence that had lasted a decade, until now. David Bennett stood beside her, boots planted, hands trembling just enough for her to notice. He said nothing, but the look in his eyes, sharp, raw, waiting, was more powerful than any words. Angela laid a hand on his shoulder. "We don't know what's down there yet," she said. David didn't look at her. "I do." The mine was unstable. The support beams at the entrance had long since rotted to splinters, and the interior walls shed dust with every footstep. Only 2 forensics teams were allowed in initially, guided by Jason and Jaden, who refused to go in again but pointed out every twist, every bend, every moment where they felt something shift. It took nearly 45 minutes to reach the chamber. They called it that afterward, the chamber, a natural hollow deep in the stone, maybe once used for rest or storage by long-gone miners. Now it held something else. The 2 bodies sat side by side on a slab of rock worn smooth by time. They were upright, backs against the wall, knees slightly bent, heads tilted gently toward one another. as if they had fallen asleep waiting for someone who never came. The dryness of the cave had preserved them eerily well, skin like parchment, hair bleached, clothes faded but mostly intact. Olivia's scarf, Ethan's desert boots, the canvas jacket with one sleeve torn. Between them lay a leather-bound field notebook and an old Nikon DSLR camera, its battery long dead but body still intact. A medical examiner crouched down, lifted one of the hands gently. "Jesus," he whispered. They weren't buried, they weren't hidden. They just sat down and waited. Angela stood at the threshold of the chamber, hand over her mouth. How the hell did we miss this? A ranger nearby shook his head. It's not even on the historical mind maps. The collapse at the front must have sealed them in. They couldn't get out. Another officer held up a flashlight, and no way to call for help. They were off-grid, deep and completely cut off, like the mountain just swallowed them. Above ground, David waited. Hours passed. He refused water, refused food, just stood at the edge, eyes fixed on the horizon. When Angela finally emerged, she walked toward him with the slow, deliberate steps of someone carrying fragile truth. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. She just nodded once, and he closed his eyes. "Was it them?" Megan asked from behind him. Her voice cracked. Angela nodded again. "We're still confirming with dental records and fingerprints," she said gently, "but it's them." Rosa arrived the next morning. When she stepped from the vehicle, she was holding Ethan's graduation photo in one hand and a rosary in the other. She didn't ask to see the bodies. She didn't need to. She only asked for one thing. Did they die together? Angela hesitated, then gave her the only truth she could. Yes, side by side. Rosa didn't cry. She just knelt down in the dust, pressed her forehead to the earth, and whispered, "Gracias por no dejarlo solo." Thank you for not letting him die alone. Later, in the ranger office, the camera and the field notebook were carefully placed on a clean table under sterile light. Forensics began the delicate process of extracting data. The memory card, miraculously intact, was removed and sent to the lab. The notebook was opened by gloved hands. Inside, dates, sketches, entries, Ethan's handwriting. Olivia's, alternating. Some frantic, some calm, some filled with fear, others with love. "It's a record," Angela murmured, eyes scanning the pages. They were trapped, but they wrote. And what they wrote, what they left behind, was not just a chronology of survival. It was something deeper. A testimony. A farewell. A declaration. But all that would come later. For now, the only thing anyone could truly feel was silence. A decade of searching had ended not in the joy of a rescue, but in the unbearable stillness of truth. They had been there all along, beneath the rocks, beneath the questions, beneath the prayers, waiting, not for rescue, but to be remembered. The notebook was small, palm-sized, with a faded leather cover and a broken elastic band stretched uselessly around its middle. Time had stained its edges, but inside the pages remained intact, miraculously preserved by the dry, undisturbed air of the chamber. The writing began on the third page. The first two had been torn out. No one ever found them. The handwriting was Ethan's at first, tight, fast, uneven. April 18th. We're trapped. Collapse at the entrance. Tried to move the rocks, but it's completely sealed. No way to climb out. Phone has 17% battery. No service. GPS dropped earlier near the ridge. Liv is okay. We're trying to stay calm. Angela Grant read each line slowly, her gloved fingers trembling. The notebook was more than a record. It was a voice, a bridge from the silence. She didn't read it alone. David and Rosa sat across the table from her in the ranger station's quiet operations room, each hunched over with the kind of reverence people usually reserved for prayer. Every word was transcribed, photographed, cataloged, but it didn't stop it from feeling sacred. Ethan continued writing on the next page. April 19th. We ration the water. Liv says we have enough for 2, maybe 3 days if we're careful. No food, just trail mix. She says it's fine, but I know she's lying to make me feel better. We keep checking the tunnel, still blocked. Airflow is okay, but it's so quiet. I keep thinking I hear things. I hope someone's coming. Then Olivia's handwriting began, neat, rounder, softer. April 20th. I can't sleep. Ethan keeps pacing. He blames himself. I told him he didn't make the mountain fall. I told him I wouldn't have changed anything, that I'd still be here, right now, with him. I think he believed me. Maybe not. But I meant it. The next few entries blurred together. Time lost definition. Some were dated, some weren't. Ethan wrote about trying different paths, about marking walls with chalk, about scraping through fallen debris until his fingers bled. Olivia wrote about her dreams, strange, vivid images of oceans and long hallways and her mother's voice calling her name through stone. She described waking up with Ethan's arms around her and how his heartbeat steadied hers even as everything else unraveled. I don't know, I think it's the 5th, Ethan wrote. Water's gone, Liv gave me the last sip. I didn't want it. She made me take it. I love her. God, I love her. Olivia's handwriting returned, shakier now. I keep thinking about sunlight, what it felt like on my skin, the way it reflected off Ethan's eyes when he smiled at me. I never told him this, but I knew I was going to marry him, even before he showed me the ring. Yes, I found it. It fell out of his jacket pocket on the second night. I never told him. I just held it while he slept. David closed his eyes at that line. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Angela continued reading. Her voice was low, steady. She didn't pause. He's sleeping now, Olivia continued. We've moved deeper into the chamber. It's quieter here, warmer. There's no hope left, I think. But we're not angry. Isn't that strange? We've accepted it. We talk about everything. Our childhoods, our favorite movies, the places we wanted to go. We tell each other we're not afraid. I think that's true. Mostly. He gave me the ring last night, slid it onto my finger with shaking hands, said, "Now you'll always know you were loved." I didn't cry. I just held him. We're married now, in the only way that matters. Rosa finally let out a sound, a small gasp, like a heart breaking without shattering. She pressed her hand to her mouth and looked away. Angela turned the page, one final entry. The writing was faint, nearly illegible. Ethan's again. I don't know what day it is. Liv is sleeping, breathing is shallow. I think I'm next. I don't feel cold anymore. Just tired. I told her every story I could remember. I held her hand. I kissed her fingers. If someone finds this, please tell our families we weren't afraid at the end, that we stayed together, that we loved, that the last thing I saw in this world was her face, and it was beautiful. The room fell silent. Angela closed the notebook gently, like she was tucking in a child. Outside, the wind moved across the sand, bending brittle grass. The mine had finally given up its dead, but not just their bodies, their voices, their truth. A forensic specialist entered the room with the camera. "There's something else," he said softly. "The memory card. We recovered the files. The last ones were taken inside the mine, just days before the end. The photos were grainy, dim, but they told a story no words could ever match. Olivia, smiling weakly in the glow of a flashlight, the engagement ring glinting on her finger. Ethan, gaunt but grinning, holding the camera at arm's length. A final shot, taken with the timer, showed them both sitting together, heads resting against each other, eyes tired but calm, love radiant even in the dark. David looked at that photo longer than any other. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "They weren't lost," he said. "They were found, in each other, and nothing, no cave, no time, no silence, could ever take that away." The photos traveled fast, faster than anyone could have predicted, faster than official statements or coroner's reports, faster than the cautious words of park officials or the hesitations of legal advisors. One leaked image, just one, ended up on a message board before midnight. The two of them, seated side by side in the shadowed chamber, heads tilted toward one another like flowers leaning into the last warmth of a setting sun, Olivia's fingers resting lightly on Ethan's, the ring a silent glimmer on her hand. No blood, no panic, just stillness, intimacy, an ending. And suddenly the internet burned. Comments poured in by the hundreds of thousands, some reverent, some disbelieving, some exploitative. 100 theories revived overnight. Conspiracy, foul play, forgotten cults, hallucinogenic fungi in abandoned mines. But those who looked longer, who looked harder, saw something else. They saw a story that the images couldn't capture completely, a depth that lived not in pixels but in pauses. Because what the pictures didn't show was the sound of their last laugh. The quiet panic in Ethan's chest, the first night when he realized the tunnel had collapsed. The way Olivia must have squeezed his hand without speaking, sensing what he wouldn't say. The long hours of waiting, counting battery percentages, rationing hope. The flickering decision to use the final ounces of energy not to scream into voids, but to document tenderness. The camera had only captured moments, But what lived between them was something else entirely. Jason and Jaden, the two who found the mine, refused all interviews. Their video channel was deleted. Their social media profiles vanished. They were not interested in fame. They couldn't look at that footage again. It didn't feel like death, Jaden told Angela Grant in a private meeting weeks later. It felt like memory. Like we walked in on someone else's dream, and we weren't supposed to be there. Rosa Morales stayed mostly quiet in the weeks following the discovery. She declined the press. She spent her mornings tending to the small flower bed outside her apartment window, planting white marigolds and lavender. Every evening she lit a candle beside Ethan's picture and whispered the same words. Gracias por esperarme. Thank you for waiting for me. David Bennett, on the other hand, moved like a man waking from a long, brutal sleep. There were still things to do. The bodies had been returned. The coroner's report confirmed the cause. Dehydration, consistent with long-term entrapment. No signs of struggle, no toxins, no violence. Just time. Just isolation. Just two people loving each other into the dark. Olivia's funeral was held on a windswept morning in Santa Fe. White chairs lined the bluff where she used to hike as a teenager, the place where she once told her father, "This is where the sky feels closest to the ground." The ceremony was simple. No suits, no podium. Just memories passed gently from one voice to another like folded paper boats across still water. Ethan's service took place a week later in East L.A., beneath a jacaranda tree that had just begun to bloom. Rosa read aloud one of Olivia's final journal entries and paused only once, her voice trembling but never breaking. "They weren't afraid," she said, placing her hand over her heart. "They weren't lost. They were in love, and love held them longer than the desert did." But even funerals couldn't contain what came next. The world had questions. Networks requested exclusive interviews. A publisher offered a book deal. A documentary crew tried to secure access to the chamber before it was sealed. David declined them all. Rosa didn't even answer. What they had received, what they had recovered, wasn't for profit. It was for closure. And yet, there was one thing they did agree to, together, a final gift. The exhibition. Hosted at the Santa Fe Contemporary Museum of Photography, the gallery was titled The Last Light, a journey through Olivia and Ethan's lens. It opened 3 months after the recovery. The first room displayed Ethan's desert photography, wide-angle shots of sun-soaked cliffs, close-ups of blooming cactus flowers, sepia-toned portraits of wind-blown sand. The second room held Olivia's sketches, fragments of her journal enlarged, the curves of her writing framed in soft light. The third room was the quietest, darkened. Stone walls, a single bench. On the far wall, the final photos, the ones taken in the mine, unedited, untouched, uncaptioned. Visitors sat for long minutes without speaking. Some cried, some reached for one another's hands, some simply stood still, because the story no longer needed to be told. It had been felt. There, in the final image, Olivia smiled faintly, not at the camera, but at Ethan. At the life they had lived, at the ending they had shaped together, not with fear, but with intention. Ethan's arm was draped over her shoulder. His face was thinner, worn, but his eyes, even in that low light, held clarity, gratitude, peace. The audio recording played softly in the background of that final room. Olivia's voice, taken from an old video Ethan had shot years ago on a camping trip. She was reading from a book she loved, her tone playful and soft. Maybe we don't choose how it ends. Maybe all we can do is choose how we love while we're here. Maybe that's enough. And somehow, in that space, it was. They sealed the mine at sunrise, just after the final forensic sweep had cleared the chamber and removed every artifact, every scrap of clothing, every bone and breadcrumb of the lives that had ended beneath that mountain's breathless silence. It was done without ceremony, just a quiet gathering of rangers and 2 silent parents standing at the edge, as a heavy metal grate was lowered and welded into place over the jagged mouth of the shaft, locking behind it the air, the memories, the weight of everything that could no longer be undone. A small plaque was drilled into the rock beside it, polished steel, simple words etched deep and without embellishment, in memory of Olivia Bennett and Ethan Morales. Lost, but never forgotten. David Bennett stood a few steps away from the edge, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed not on the plaque, but on the horizon behind it, where the desert stretched out in waves of orange and gray, endless and unknowable, just as it had been the day his daughter vanished into its silence. Rosa stood beside him, one hand resting gently on the rosary at her chest, the other wrapped tightly around a folded photograph. Ethan and Olivia, laughing at a campsite, both windblown and sun-warmed, unaware that the clock had already started ticking on their time together. The moment the final weld sparked and hissed, Rosa whispered a prayer, not of release but of preservation, that the love left inside that mountain would remain untouched, unspoiled, unbroken, even if the rest of the world moved on. But the world, as it always does, kept turning. The press lost interest, the search threads quieted, the hashtags faded into digital dust, and people, those who never knew Olivia or Ethan but felt tethered to their story, returned to their lives with a quiet sense of reverence, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but certain it had meant something. David did not return to Santa Fe right away. Instead, he rented a small cabin on the outskirts of Tucson, a quiet place surrounded by prickly pear and silence, where he spent his days rebuilding his hands that had grown calloused from months of searching, hands that had held maps and photographs and broken hope, hands that now learned the slower art of carving wood. He made small things at first, boxes, picture frames, a simple bench with Olivia's name burned into the grain, and later began shaping walking sticks, each one marked with a carved sunburst, a symbol he and Olivia had once sketched together on a napkin during a father-daughter road trip. He gave them away to hikers passing through town, each gift accompanied by a quiet nod and no explanation. Rosa returned home. The apartment was smaller than she remembered, quieter somehow, despite its unchanged size. She reopened Ethan's room for the first time in 10 years, let the air move through it, sunlight pooling on the quilt he used to sleep beneath, the one she had sewn by hand when he left for college. She didn't change much. She kept his photos where they were, his books lined up exactly as he left them. But on the small nightstand, she placed Olivia's ring, the one recovered from her hand in the chamber, the one Ethan had slipped onto her finger in the dark, with a votive candle and a tiny vase of desert flowers, refreshed weekly. When asked by her church community how she was doing, she would smile and say, "I'm learning to walk with the quiet." It was in that quiet that something else began to take shape. Inspired by the exhibition, by the words and photos that had drawn so many strangers into a private tragedy, a group of former park rangers, wilderness guides, and emergency responders approached David and Rosa with a proposal to start a foundation, not in memory of disappearance, but in dedication to preparation, awareness, and love. They named it the Last Light Project. Its mission was simple: to educate hikers, campers, explorers, anyone who stepped into wild spaces, on safety, preparedness, and the emotional realities of solitude. But deeper than that, the project became a sanctuary for those left behind, a place where families of the missing could share their stories, their grief, their hope. The website featured a gallery of photos, Olivia's sketches, Ethan's lens work, and excerpts from the notebook recovered in the mine, including the final journal entry, displayed with consent under the heading, "Love, Even Here." Messages poured in, from sisters who had lost brothers in avalanches, from parents still waiting for news from boat accidents, or cross-country cyclists gone silent, from widows, from strangers. All writing not because they wanted to understand what had happened, but because Olivia and Ethan had reminded them that even in endings, there could be something soft, something human, something eternal. The project gained traction. Wilderness seminars were held. Candlelight vigils marked every April 18th. Schools invited speakers, and the world, slowly, gently, began to remember not just how the story ended, but how it had been lived. On the second anniversary of the discovery, David and Rosa met once again beneath the sky of Superstition Mountains. This time not in anguish, but in honor. They brought no cameras, no reporters, no entourage. Just 2 folding chairs, a small thermos of coffee, and a weathered photo album containing the lives their children had once planned to build. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. At one point, as the wind shifted and the sun dipped low over the rocks, David glanced sideways and said, "You know, I think we all want closure, but I'm starting to believe closure isn't an ending." Rosa looked at him, her eyes soft. "No, it's just the moment you stop needing the answer to love them anyway." And in that moment, the wind moved gently between them, like breath returned. The desert does not mark time the way people do. It doesn't remember anniversaries. It doesn't mourn. It simply waits. And then, for reasons unknown to science or prayer, it blooms. It happens every spring, sometime in April, never the same day twice. The Sonoran floor, cracked and hostile for most of the year, awakens beneath the rain-soaked sky and gives birth to color. Gold poppies, desert marigolds, and lupin burst through the dust like whispered confessions, vivid and defiant, their petals trembling in air that still tastes faintly of sun and stone. For those who do not know what happened here, it's just a natural event. But for those who remember, those who carry the names Olivia and Ethan inside their bones, it is something else. It is ritual. It is return. It is grace. On the 10th anniversary of their final journey, a crowd gathered not far from the now sealed mine entrance. There were no balloons, no music, just wildflowers and silence, and people who had traveled from dozens of states. Some who had once searched for them, others who had only read about their story, and many who had lost someone of their own to the vast, unrelenting wilderness. At the center stood David Bennett and Rosa Morales, older now, slower in their steps, but resolute. Rosa held a single white lily, freshly cut. David carried a small wooden box, one he had carved himself, etched with the initials O+E surrounded by sunbursts, the same symbol Olivia had once doodled in the margins of her high school notebook. They placed the box near the plaque. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from strangers, from friends, from children too young to understand loss, but old enough to feel it. Letters addressed not to the dead, but to the living. Lessons learned from the way Olivia and Ethan had loved, had hoped, had faced the darkness without turning on each other. No speeches were made. Instead, one by one, visitors stepped forward and placed flowers at the base of the sealed mine, forming a ring of color around its rusted mouth, like a crown for something holy. Near the end of the line, a boy no older than 10 stepped forward with a sketch pad. He said nothing, but handed the pad to Rosa. Inside was a pencil drawing. 2 figures sitting side by side beneath a night sky, stars above them like scattered seeds, a ring of light drawn around their silhouettes. Beneath the image, in blocky handwriting, it read, "I hope I love like that one day." Rosa pressed the pad to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. The wind picked up then, a soft rolling wave that brushed through the field and carried with it the unmistakable scent of creosote and blooming ocotillo, a scent Olivia had once described in her journal as how the earth smells when it remembers to be gentle. That night, back in town, the local museum hosted a candlelit screening of The Last Light, a short documentary curated by volunteers of the foundation. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't include dramatic music or fast cuts. It was quiet. Just excerpts from the journal, readings from letters, and footage of the landscape that had taken and given so much. It ended not with the discovery of the bodies, but with a single frame. Olivia and Ethan, captured in Ethan's final self-timed photograph, sitting together with their eyes closed, heads resting against each other, the flash catching the faintest smile on Olivia's lips. The screen faded to black, and in the hush that followed, someone whispered, "They're still here." And perhaps they were, because the mountain no longer felt like a place of death. It had become a place of remembering, of learning, of returning. Schools began taking field trips not to the mine itself, but to nearby trails where guides spoke about wilderness safety and emotional resilience. Couples began proposing in view of the desert bloom, not to mimic Ethan and Olivia's story, but to honor it, to plant their own love in the same soil. Artists painted murals in Phoenix, in Santa Fe, in Los Angeles. One showed a pair of hands holding light, another, a single flower blooming in the dark. At a university in Flagstaff, a scholarship was founded in Olivia's name for aspiring nurses committed to working in underserved communities. At another in Tucson, a photography studio was dedicated to Ethan, where students pinned their favorite images alongside one of his, Desert Bloom at Dusk, taken just a week before their final hike. In each corner of the country, their story became not a tragedy, but a compass, pointing not to fear, but to love, not to despair, but to meaning. And every April, when the desert broke into bloom, David and Rosa returned. They did not bring speeches. They did not bring offerings. They only brought themselves and a quiet understanding that what had begun in grief had been transformed, not erased. They would stand for hours without speaking, side by side, eyes scanning the horizon, as if still waiting, Not for answers, but simply for the wind to carry one more message from beneath the earth. The kind you feel more than hear. The kind that sounds like love, learning how to say goodbye without ever really letting go. Years pass, the way wind smooths stone, not in great gestures but in quiet, persistent touch. And though the news cycle has long since moved on, and though new mysteries have risen to take the place of old ones, there are still those who speak of Olivia and Ethan as if they had just walked into the canyon yesterday, their laughter still echoing faintly against the red cliffs, their boots still pressing gently into the dust, leaving behind a trail no storm can quite erase. The story never really ended because it was never only about loss. It was about the choices made in the dark, the way love can turn even the most brutal silence into a sanctuary, the way two people can hold on to each other. Not because they have hope of being found, but because they refuse to let fear write their final chapter. In the years since the discovery, something strange has happened. Not in the world outside, but in the hearts of those who carry their memory. Strangers write letters not to mourn, but to reflect. Couples leave stones wrapped in ribbon at the trailhead where they began their hike, a symbolic gesture to promise that no argument, no uncertainty will be carried past that point. Children who once feared the dark now sleep beside flashlights, comforted by the story of how a girl used one not to fight fear, but to share drawings with the boy she loved. Olivia and Ethan, in the end, became more than a mystery solved. They became myth, yes, but the kind rooted not in fantasy, but in truth, in humanity, in the unbearable beauty of choosing kindness even when the sky gives no sign of morning, and the mine, long since sealed and overgrown with wildflower and stone, remains undisturbed. A monument not of tragedy, but of devotion. A place where people lower their voices and take off their hats, not because they are told to, but because they feel something sacred in the silence. Rosa Morales still walks the desert trails sometimes, a woven hat pulled low over her brow, Ethan's old backpack on her shoulders, filled not with survival gear, but with snacks and small folded letters. Notes she leaves behind at quiet bends in the trail, places she imagines her son once stopped to catch his breath or look up at the sky. She writes things like, "You are not alone," or "There is light in you yet." And sometimes she draws a tiny sunburst at the corner of the paper, the symbol that means something only to those who know the story. David Bennett now teaches woodworking at a community center in Santa Fe, not for money, not for prestige, but because he says it helps him feel time again. The way Olivia used to say carving was like listening to wood. Remember what it once was. He tells his students to build with patience, to make things that last. And he keeps a small carved ring on a leather string around his neck, not because he needs the reminder, but because some part of him believes she would have wanted him to keep building, even after. One of Ethan's last photos, the one of Olivia staring up at a single shaft of light with dust swirling like gold in the beam, now hangs in the Smithsonian as part of an exhibit on human resilience. It's captioned with her words, "Maybe it's not about being found, maybe it's about how we wait." And no one can stand in front of it without feeling something shift in their chest, something quiet and powerful and inexplicable. Students write essays about them, musicians write songs. A play was even staged once in a small Los Angeles theater called Last Light, featuring only 2 characters and a single lantern that dimmed scene by scene. It sold out every night, not because of the production, but because people came needing to believe in something soft again, something real. The story they left behind became less about what happened and more about what mattered. Not about death, but the art of loving, in spite of it. Not about tragedy, but the space between fear and grace, where all of us are quietly learning how to live. And somewhere, under the layers of dust and bloom and time, that mind still holds their names, not carved into the stone, but into the silence itself. A kind of echo that doesn't fade but deepens, like a voice whispering beneath the wind. We were here, and we chose love. They never made it out of the mountains, but in a way, they never really left. Olivia and Ethan taught us that even when the world forgets your name, even when the road disappears, love leaves a light behind, a light that doesn't fade, a light that guides others home. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes the quietest voices echo the loudest, and sometimes the most unforgettable stories are the ones we almost lost. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.